We just bought it. One, two, three, four. Okay, we're all here. So I'm going to call the work session of the Oregon City Commission order for Tuesday, October 8th, 2019. Call roll, please.
Commissioner Rachel Smith. Here. Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Here.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Present.
And Mayor Dan Holliday.
Here. So, Mr. Cronky, you want to...
So for future work session topics, at our last work session, we were directed to kind of focus on the top 10. So we took, a couple months ago, we asked everybody to rank their projects. We took those rankings, averaged them in. What you have before you is our best interpretation of what those look like. And so at the last meeting, we were asked to focus on the top 10 and leave those below it to not be addressed at this point. Obviously, you can see some of those we've already addressed. So happy to answer any questions about what you have before you.
Are we moving them up?
It's good to me.
We're going to start. We've been directed to focus on the top 10. So that's what we're going to start focusing on.
Dan?
Yes.
So if we've got something on here that's done, that's why I said, does this move?
Oh, it's a rolling 10?
No, that's what I'm asking. Is it? No, is it? If we finish something, do we have a new 10? I mean, I'm not understanding what the,
Okay.
or do we just do all the 10 and then we get a new 10?
The goal is rolling.
What is your suggestion? Don't add any more, right?
Let's get through what we've got. So, we can certainly keep moving these up, realizing that this is the priority that the commission has identified them in, and we'll start working our way through them, working down that as best we can. Obviously things are going to pop up at different times, and we'll address those if they are farther down the list. But generally our focus will be on the top 10. And my understanding is a rolling list of this entire list, unless there is something you would like to remove.
Hope springs eternal, huh?
It does. I had to try.
To be honest, I would be happy to remove the discussion of a construction excise tax, because it seems stupid to me, when we're talking about building affordable housing, to then put a tax on the very thing that we're trying to make affordable.
I'd actually support what you just said. It's like at the end of the list.
Well, it's 17,
Well, the reason I don't support that is because construction excise tax is essentially what's allowing a lot of local jurisdictions in Oregon to do affordable housing projects and actually pay for housing FTE, and or that's where they're getting the funds in order to.
Well, we just gave them $750 million for housing.
We gave who?
The region.
Yeah, but we have no shovel-ready projects in order to even tap into those metro dollars. All of those dollars for Clackamas County are going to go to the city of Milwaukee and other cities because we have no projects to come to the table. We don't have any projects to come to the table because we have no funds to put into it, and we don't have staff to dedicate to it. So construction excise tax. I'm just saying we should talk about it and see what it looks like.
Looks like we already are.
I concur with that as a future item.
I'm not saying we'll get there.
All right, let's just
leave it as
It is a goal of the commission.
When you feel like you've run out of things for us to do at work sessions, you can bring us back a new list. How's that?
I'm just trying to figure out with all the dates let me see.
Those dates are scheduled to talk about.
Okay. But he's got done on some of them.
Because those are the dates we talked about, those items.
Okay.
Is the West rate differential, is that just a discussion about potential what we could do? I mean, or is it just to educate us on something that's already happened that we were annoyed with that happened?
Beyond annoyed.
Yes, I was trying to be politically nice.
I think it was just wanting to have a discussion about what are the options to engage Clackamas County Water Environmental Service about the inequity that we see with the rate differential.
So
Talk about it.
here's how I feel about it. That is that Clackamas County, when we did our right-of-way fee, they just went ahead and changed the differential. They changed our water rate to, or the wastewater rate to a different rate, higher rate, so that it would cancel out the right-of-way fee. And I believe that it's illegal for them to do that because all of the customers of Tri-City are all the customers. That you can't break out a section, the Oregon City section, and say they're a different ratepayer than the people in Gladstone or West Lynn. It's fundamentally wrong.
So the question is, what are our options?
All right,
So that's what that,
my option would be to
Are we talking
just,
about it now?
well, I'm just gonna give you a quick update.
Okay, thank you.
What I've told the county is that I was ready to stop paying them the differential. We would still charge it, put it in an escrow account, but we would stop paying them, and then they can come sue us.
Yeah, I don't want to do that.
It's always better to be a plaintiff than, or a defendant than a
Respondent, yeah.
plaintiff.
Yeah.
Just so you know, Wes is going to be attending our next city commission meeting on the 16th to provide their annual update.
Right.
We can ask them how they arrived at this.
I wouldn't
fine
mind
number.
moving that up on the list.
Yeah, like number one.
Like
sounds
number
like
one.
it may happen. I won't be here, so
Okay.
I'll have to watch that video. Okay, that's fine. I was just
So
wondering
I
what the
think,
item was.
I think there's a little bit of direction there to maybe creep the West discussion up a ways. But beyond that,
At
let's
least
just,
into the top 10.
we're all okay for now on this? Nod your head, yes.
Yes.
Sure.
Okay, so we're gonna move on.
I was shaking my head no.
3A,
only one.
19-553, Department of Land Conservation and Development, DLCD, Geologic Hazard Guideline Presentation.
Right, thank you for that, Mayor. So
my favorite
we've got some guests here from the Oregon Department of Land and Conservation and Development, and we're going to have them come on up. I'll introduce both of them. The reason why they're here tonight is because about 2 months ago, maybe a little bit more, I was reading this draft guideline document and was very impressed with the content of that material and the fact that Oregon City was featured and acknowledged in a lot of ways in that document as some of the upcoming guidelines and recommendations that would come out of DLCD. I've turned and shared it with Josh, and he says, well, I've been working with them a little bit on that too. So if you know Josh Wheeler, he's our assistant city engineer, so he I think must have, I don't know who reached out to who, but somehow there was a little bit of a relationship there. And as a result of that, we've got some there's a fair amount of content in there that features Oregon City. And the other reason I thought it was important is because we do a lot of development in geologic hazard areas, and sometimes some of the feedback on that isn't so positive. And so trying to find guidance on how to deal with geologic hazards, I think, is good to have from the state. And if there's something in that guidance that we need to look at modifying to adjust the way we deal with geologic hazards, we'll be sure to take that up. And I understand that guidance document's just about published, so we're looking forward to that. So with that, I wanted to introduce Bill Burns. He's trying to read his card here, engineering geologist, and he's in the natural hazards section supervisor for geologic survey and services program. And then Tricia Sears, she's the natural hazards planner for DLCD. So with that.
Before we move on, Commissioner Lyle Smith, you want to do your declaration?
Sure. So to be very clear, I currently work for the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development, and I actually posted this land use guide on our website this afternoon right before I left work today. And I used to work at the Department of Geology and Mineral Industries, and I worked with Bill Burns and other folks at the Department of Geology, so welcome. And so I think
Thank
I've
you for
cleared
that.
any potential conflict of interest.
Okay, fire away.
All right, well, thanks for having us. I wanted to give you a little background on this project. So the Department of Geology and the Department of Land Conservation and Development collaboratively put in a proposal to FEMA to prepare this guide, and we got funded through FEMA. And the project ends in a couple months. And we are right now getting ready to release this guide, and then we are going to follow that up with some trainings. And so this is the first time we've kind of presented on this, so we're a little excited. I just wanted to start with a little background. So at the Department of Geology, we have a database called SLIDO, the statewide landslide information database of Oregon. In that database, we have over 13,000 landslides that have taken place within the last around 100 years. So we know landslides are a chronic and really damaging natural hazard here in Oregon that we need to work on risk reduction.
Where is that photograph from?
That's the Burlingame landslide between Burlingame and Terwilliger. In this case, this landslide occurred not when it was raining, and there was a irrigation pipe that broke, saturated this family's entire lot, and their entire lot and house went down and hit the houses below.
Override.
So, Oregon City, just wanted to give you a little background on at least what's been worked on here as far as hazards. In 1979, our department made one of the earlier landslide maps of northwestern Clackamas County, Bulletin 99, and I think that's been in use in the county and probably in Oregon City for a long time. You guys were one of the first communities that got LIDAR data. This was around 2005.
I have a rule. Okay, we don't use acronyms, so tell me what LIDAR is.
So LIDAR is light detection and ranging, and it's really just a very new technology that we use to get a high-resolution topographic image of the surface of the Earth.
Thank you.
And when it comes to landslides, seeing if the surface is smooth or whether it's been disrupted by landslides, it's really important. Anyway, you guys collected it for yourselves, and we used it in the first map that we made in the state, and that's the one in the upper right there, which was published in 2006. Years later, we got another bunch of money and on another FEMA grant and created this kind of suite of maps that we now create for many communities in Oregon. And they included a landslide inventory, which shows where landslides have occurred in the past, and then two models that try to predict the future. One is on shallow landslides and one is on deep-seated landslides. And the maps you're looking at cover portions of Oregon City. And I guess Tricia will take it away from here. Just a little background.
All right, so a frequently asked question, what are the goals of this landslide guide that we put together? What were we trying to accomplish when we asked for the money to do this? And in summary, really, the goals are simply to reduce the risk of landslide hazard in a community, and for that community become more resilient through land use options and strategies. And that might be a little bit jargony, but much of the expressed need for this guide actually came from communities that have gone through and worked with Dogami on these LIDAR inventory and susceptibility maps, and they had a lot of questions during those processes. So questions such as, which they also posed to DLCD, being the land use branch of the state. So between the two agencies, we were getting questions like, how do we use these maps? Do we have to adopt the maps? How do we write code provisions for this? What is the difference between, and how do we understand engineering geologic reports and geotechnical engineering reports? So that's just a sample of some of the questions we were getting, and it was really notable to us how many we were getting, and so we decided to go ahead and move forward by trying to address some of those things by getting this grant proposal. So within the guide itself, you'll find a table which actually lists all the communities with Dogami LIDAR-based inventory and landslide susceptibility maps. So just to give you an idea of what those numbers look like, 46 cities and 14 counties have partial or complete Dogami LIDAR-based inventory maps, and 35 cities and 9 counties have partial or complete Dogami LIDAR-based landslide susceptibility maps. Go to the next. There we go. So as part of the research for this guide, DLCD and Dogami staff actually reviewed comprehensive plans and zoning codes. Those come out as the most obvious places to look. But it also led us to look at things such as building codes, grading and erosion control, stormwater management codes, and things like that for other places that there might be things related to this particular topic. Unfortunately, we couldn't look at all the codes and in all of the communities in Oregon. That would have been, that would be a very enormous project. So we selected 28 cities and 6 counties for this code review. Of the 34 communities that we selected, 2 of them do not actually have Dogami LiDAR-based inventory and landslide susceptibility maps. It was actually 2 cities, Salem and Newport, but they have really interesting and unique geologic hazard codes. So we wanted to include them as something different, but yet having quite a few strengths in their codes. And so to help support and illustrate our points in the guide, we provided a list of features of strong comprehensive plans, an outline model for comprehensive plan provisions that would address landslide hazards, a list of features for strong zoning codes, a model for zoning code provisions about landslide hazards. And we also provided 2 in-depth examples of comprehensive plan provisions, and those were from Astoria and Medford. And then 6 in-depth examples of zoning codes, so that's Oregon City gets featured in that, as well as Astoria, Salem, Newport, Portland, and Multnomah County. So really, though all of the codes have their strengths and weaknesses, but we wanted to be sure to demonstrate a lot of the ones with strong codes, so that people would have examples to work with. And then we also have a lot of shorter featured examples from, as you can kind of see some of the stats up there on the chart. But if you read the landslide guide, you'll find out more about those codes and sort of why they get mentioned. So I did want to touch on some of the strengths of Oregon City's code. As Bill mentioned, you were one of the first ones to get LiDAR. So it really came to our mind quite quickly that that would be something we'd want to know is what exactly have you guys done with your code provisions and with your maps? So you're using them, which is awesome because not everybody does. So one of the things that also kind of jumped out was that the geotechnical review procedure, which I understand started around 2013, has tiers. Excuse me, and we find tiered approaches to geologic hazards can be very useful, provides a few more options and ways to look at things for both the city and for the homeowner that might be applying for this. The other thing we noticed is that you have covenants and you actually have those recorded so that they run with the land, and you can find those in a title search. So that provides a lot of awareness of the geologic hazard on the property, and that's a really good thing. There are a couple of other things, though, that we noticed in having conversation with staff and looking at the code is that the GIS database that you have here to track the parcel information about land use cases and such doesn't actually contain notes that identify which properties have those waivers or those covenants. And without that information, you couldn't really run a query and kind of see like, oh, we had 3 of those this year, or we had 15 of those last year. Where are they? What's happening with those? So it kind of relates. I noticed on the agenda there's a discussion about the buildable lands inventory is also on your agenda tonight. So for example, when you're looking at what lands are available or not available to be developed, it would be useful to consider how many of the properties have had these waivers or these covenants on there. So you can actually use that information you're already getting if you just kind of track it differently. One of the other things we noticed in the review of these codes is that a lot of codes simply rely on slope to trigger their review process, and that's really not the only way that you should think about geologic hazards. They're not necessarily dependent on steep slope. Also, a lot of codes don't seem to clarify as to whether the slope is measured over the entire parcel or a portion of the parcel, and so there's a lot of codes that could be clarified in that way. So again, it's, you've chosen to use these maps and the inventory information, which, like I said, not everyone is doing. So really, in essence, you're just demonstrating a really strong and thoughtful way to approach having your community become more resilient. in their development, and you've chosen to make some hard choices, but the goal is to make stronger the people, the property, and the environment. So I think that's a really good thing. You've gotten out ahead in some ways of some communities. And then I just wanted to note a couple of points or benefits of adopting the maps. You're safeguarding human life, critical infrastructure, and property to the best of the jurisdiction's ability. You would have a firm legal basis for developing policies and regulations. And you'd be basing your policies and regulations on the most up-to-date scientific data analysis and mapping information. And finally, defending the jurisdiction against claims or lawsuits based on the fact that danger was known to the jurisdiction and yet no action was taken to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. So in other words, you actually are acknowledging there's an issue and you're trying to address it, which is generally beneficial and recommended. And finally, as John mentioned earlier, we are on the cusp, and Rachel too, actually, we are on the cusp of having the documents be available. So it's an actual landslide guide as well as what we called a quick reference. It's just a little short fold-out page that highlights things from the guide, a little easier than maybe the bulkier full document. But we will have that on the DLCD website under the natural hazards page where there's a landslide section and landslide resources. And Jogami will also have them on the website under their landslide section of the website. So we're pretty excited about that. We're also, as Bill mentioned, going to be doing a couple more presentations, including a webinar, which we would certainly invite you all to join us in. We'll have to let you know what date we decide on, though. We've targeted the end of this month, but we haven't fully secured the details on that, so stay tuned. And we will be putting out our press release tomorrow to announce the release of the documents. And we also have an email distribution list and a couple of listservs that we'll be sending it out to. So Josh is definitely on the list, so he should be able to share that information. And then just the last thing on the slide there, there's a previous document that came out in 2001 called Planning for Natural Hazards, Oregon Technical Resource Guide. And it was something that GLCD put together with the Oregon Partnership for Disaster Resilience, which is at the University of Oregon. And it featured a number of zoning code and comprehensive and sort of legal questions as well as natural hazard information. So you could think of this particular guide as something that updates that section from 2001. That's it.
Questions, anybody?
Yeah, a quick one.
Yeah, we both probably all do.
I saw you defined our strengths. Do you also have conversations where the policy could be improved? Because I hear, like, don't just judge slope angle as your only concern. So that obviously, you got liquefaction or hydrology. You talked about that basically. I mean, are they going to be additional factors that are they already in the study? Are they going to be integrated in the future? Or are they just harder to measure than a simple slope measurement?
I'm not sure.
So the question is, the base question is, do you work with existing jurisdictions to improve their current policy based on knowledge you have?
Yes.
There it is.
Yes, we do.
I can help with the hazard part too.
Yeah.
Yes, you guys are using more than just slope right now. You're using the maps that we created, which definitely account for not just the slope, but the geology and the fact that some of the areas are existing landslides. And that's part of the data that you guys are already using, so it's great.
Can I respond just a little bit to that as well? So in your commission packet, we've included some details about our process right now. And I think that's important because it's gotten better. And we've definitely, we kind of have to balance both the geologic hazard risks and the science that goes into that with explaining that and working with our development community to understand that. So one of the things that Josh has done an amazing job of is creating clear articulation of what those code requirements are, checklists that make it easy for both our reviewers, because we're not all geologic experts. We hire a third-party geologic expert to do review all of our development projects that are in land use. And I would say in Oregon City, the developable land is getting, tighter and tighter. And so we're seeing more and more of those lots that you would have never thought would be developed on being proposed for development. So I don't know what the percentage is. I mean, Josh may know, but we're just seeing an abundance of those. So we're spending more and more time on geologic hazards, and so I think having the checklist is a major improvement. Articulating that, we've got the developer forum that happens now bi-monthly, and so we're able to explain some of those kind of things. And then, just having the expertise of a third-party geotech who's very well experienced in Oregon City has brought our program to a much higher level of review and understanding.
Commissioner McGriff?
Yeah, I have a similar question to Commissioner O'Donnell's, that I would like to see an analysis of our code and see where we could improve, because one of the things that I have a concern about is that we very infrequently say no. And when you talk about areas in our community that are being developed, they're usually, unfortunately, with inexperienced people who are trying to develop something on these areas where maybe they shouldn't be developing. And I know that people get all wigged out about, well, are we doing a taking? Well, sometimes you just can't build on something. And so I don't know, do we ever say no?
I think what we say is not no, because it's not a taking, but we point out how challenging that is. So we've seen a lot of delayed projects. Does that mean that folks won't come back when it becomes more economical to develop on that? Depending on the economy, you may find a lot that wasn't developable in 2008, but today, for whatever reason it is. And in those cases, I would say we're careful about saying no, but the requirements often far outweigh. I think Trillium Park Drive is an example of that, where we know based on the roadway problems that we're seeing there that it's very expensive just to restore the roadway, let alone build a single-family home on that lot. That's not to say that somebody won't come in and throw way more money than we would ever thought and be able to meet the design standards. Well, more than the requirements, but they'd also be able to provide a design that would provide a very high level of confidence that it could be successful.
Well, it's funny that you bring that one up, because we said no, and back in the day, and that decision was overturned because we were told definitively by our third-party expert that that area would slide. And, chickens come home to roost, as they say.
Just to be clear, I mentioned Trillium Park. That's a different slide, and I'm not sure that happened in that case, but you're talking about the Forest Edge Apartments.
No, I was talking about that one as well. The Forest Edge apartment, we did say no. That one we did, the city said no.
Forest Edge?
It wasn't called Forest Edge at the time.
It was no okay.
Well, the planning commission said no, the city commission overturned the
Yes,
planning
they
commission.
did, and we were told definitively that it was gonna go. That's the second example that I'm aware of, that I was personally involved in.
One thing I would add to John's response too is that we also limit the density of development based on slope as well, and that's just outright in our code. So for areas over 35%, you just don't get a home. If you have a lot, you might get one, but if you have a big lot, you're not getting any density for that higher portion. And then there's also limited density between 25 and 35 as well.
I know sometimes as you say, John, the engineering is getting more and more sophisticated, but I worry sometimes that we cannot engineer our way out of some things. So just, we're being aware. We're being progressive about it. We're being very forward thinking about it, but, we can always, as I said, if we had an analysis to see whether we could make some improvements by some experts, I think that would be fantastic.
Commissioner Lyles?
But it can be better.
Commissioner Lyles Smith?
Thank you. I was wondering, sorry, this is more for John Lewis or Josh, or maybe Laura. Is there a plan by Oregon City to take this work that was done by Degami and DLCD and have a look at our codes, or do we feel like we've done that as part of this project? Maybe Josh has done it as part of this project, and do we feel like we're good, or what?
Well, Josh may have a plan. He's got lots of plans that are usually pretty good to learn about. But I would definitely say that we recognize that there's always room for improvement. So having this document to build upon what we already have is, to me, an obvious yes. When have we a written plan? I guess maybe Josh has some thoughts on that. Maybe not.
Yeah, I think the simple answer would be that we reviewed their document and gave comments back. We looked at what else was in there to see if there was anything we were missing. For the most part, with the science that's there today, it looks like we're covering pretty much everything. The one thing that Tricia talked about was that we're not necessarily tracking some certain things, like where we've given indemnity agreements and things like that. And so that's something that we're going to figure out how to track. But from the science part, we pretty much are up to the current science that's out there.
Okay, and then my second question is our geologic hazard overlay, our overlays, are they conservative in making sure that they're including, these high susceptibility or even, like how would you explain how well our geologic hazard overlay is being applied to known hazard areas? And has that been reviewed? I'm not sure if that's planning or if that's public works. So.
Mr. Roy.
Laura.
Our geologic hazards overlay district, once you're in that overlay, it puts you into further scrutiny and review. That overlay consists of areas between 25% slope and above, and it also includes all historic landslides. So they were talking about how we integrate those data and maps that we have received long ago. And so it puts us in a process where then we get geotechs looking at the development and seeing what type of additional mitigation is needed. Also, we have the provisions on limiting density in higher slope areas. So the shorter answer is yes, we use all of the maps, and we cast a broad net to include all those sloped areas and landslide areas.
I guess it would be good to know that where we have our known landslides, the apartments and Trillium, whatever, it would be good, and maybe you've done this to double check what was the slope on that of something that we know slid and caused us problems as a city, and question, is that 20% steep slope enough, or should we change that geologic hazard area to be more conservative, and maybe if we have already having problems in current slope percentages, making sure we're including those. I'd rather be more conservative and have a development go through, one extra round of review or something like that. Maybe it's a lower round, so this tiered approach. Anyway, I don't know. I don't know what the slopes were for these places where we've had development. So I think we would be doing ourselves a favor if we're conservative on that.
Anybody else?
I'd like to.
Sure.
I agree with Lyle Smith. I mean, what other factors other than slope angle play into it, obviously? And then I had a question that, like, we did one in Kenema recently where they had to bring in a geotech engineer, and he said it's buildable with these retaining walls. Does our fee schedule change, or is that cost just borne by the applicant for that additional information?
Go ahead. Well, if you're talking the cost of the third party, so the developer incurs all his costs for his survey, all the details that are required of the application, and the cost for his geotechnical engineer, and they are required to cover the cost of the third party review as well.
Does our fee schedule vary with that at all, or not at all? That's just a cost borne by the applicant.
That's on the fee schedule.
It's on the fee schedule as a.
They cover the third party costs as part of a geologic hazard permit.
It's just stated as this is a cost you will bear. Okay, thanks.
Commissioner McGriff?
Now, John or Josh, could you briefly describe the waiver? I know you've told me about it once before, but I'm not totally remembering just the nuances of it.
Yes, there's two types of waivers. There's a waiver by the city engineer, which is where my staff would recommend to me, then I would recommend to the city engineer that there is no real issue, and so therefore we should waive it. And so those are situations where the buffer of an area and there's not really very many slopes really there, or the slopes are because of a ditch or something that's not really gonna be a slide, that it's just obvious to us in no way, shape, or form that it's not an issue, then we make that recommendation and then we sign off on that. When there's times that it looks like it's not sure, it's not obvious, we reach out to our third-party geotech, and then he makes a recommendation that, yes, that's a waiver, no big deal, or no, they need to go through a geotechnical review. And then in that situation, since we've reached out to him, then they have to pay for that waiver in that case. And we still require the indemnity in that type of waiver. We don't require the indemnity for the city engineer waiver.
And what we've noticed is that when we went to the LiDAR data, because of the more precision that brought, is, drainage ditches were getting picked up because the slope on the mathematical formula caught it, or retaining walls that were there because you had that difference in elevation, it got caught. So some of these are mapping clarifications based just on the more precise data that we have when we went to the better technology.
Yeah, I like the fact that we're being cautious. I appreciate that. That's great.
Any further questions? Thank you for your time. Appreciate your coming.
Thanks.
So moving on, 19-561, Oregon City Water Distribution System Water Rate and SDC Study. Mr. Lewis.
Okay, so we've done one work session where we got through water rates, and we actually talked a lot about our water master plan update and the capital plan associated with that. FCS, so that was a two-part presentation that included more of the engineering side of things from Murray Smith and Associates, and then John Gillarducci with FCS Group presented the rate discussion, and out of that we had some good conversation. There was some asks from the commission about different scenarios maybe that we could run for the rate model. And so today we've got Doug Gabbard with FCS Group. He's the one who's actually crunching all the numbers that John presents to us most of the time. So Doug's here to present for the second half of this conversation, which is to complete the water rate study, but to also talk to you about the system development charge results. So with that, Doug, I'm gonna.
Well, good evening. I am Doug Gabbard with FCS Group. I am going to show you some things you have already seen, which means I'm going to go rather quickly through that, and then we'll slow down at the new material. So we are going to talk first about rates and then a little more deeply about SDCs. You may recall some of the things you're seeing here. Our rate study was based upon a certain set of assumptions, and also that your capital needs are the star of the show. They are driving the need for rate increases, $83 million over the planning period. Now, your charter amendment, which limits you to 3% rate increases, limits your ability to buy this capital. In fact, if we left the 3% cap in place, about $13.6 million of the capital need will necessarily go unfunded. Another way to look at that is on this graph, the dark bars are operating costs, and the lighter bars are availability of money for capital. You can see the dark line, which is your current revenue at your current rates, clears the operating expenses for several years. And so your operating income is healthy at this time and will continue to be healthy even at your current rates. It's the capital that you can't do because of your current rates. And so the dotted line shows your rates going up at the 3% currently allowed by your charter amendment, but remember that that line only funds about $69 million in capital, not the amount that you need. So the last time we were here, we showed you a number of rate scenarios, and we can go back to any one of those if you like. But you asked a very good question, and I'm embarrassed that I didn't think of it in advance because it was very logical. And what you said to us was, okay, if 3% is not the right annual percent cap, give us a percent for every year that will get us what we need. And after I got over my embarrassment, we started working some numbers. Now, I can't give you a single percent that will give you all that you need to spend in the time that we plan to spend it. But if we massage some of those project timing, and we make the profile look like what you see in front of you. This is the same total expenditure, the $83 million, just timed a little differently. And if you're able to do that, then I can get you what you need at annual increases of 5%. So 5% is the magic number that you're looking for. Annual increases at that level will get you the full CIP with slightly different timing, especially in the out years.
Let me pause you there for a second.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Lewis, since the charter amendment, has the city been charging a 3% rate increase every year?
Yes.
Okay. Good.
All right, and this is just a reminder, you have seen mainly most of this slide already, but we have put in the Oregon City 2021 flat, that's the 5% per year as a rate scenario, which gets you the $42 per month after you include South Fork water treatment. The rest of these you've already seen. So now we've left enough time to talk about my favorite thing, system development charges. So just a reminder that system development charges are one-time fees, and they can include two components, a reimbursement fee and an improvement fee. Reimbursement fees are based upon eligible, available capacity in your existing assets. A reimbursement fee is based upon the eligible portion of new projects. And the eligible portion is the portion that will serve new growth. Those add up to a system development charge. Now, all of that gets divided by your growth in system demand, and for purposes of a water utility, the most common way to measure that growth is in meter capacity equivalents, or MCEs. I gave the definition before I gave, there we go. All right, so one of the things that got us the most scrutiny in this calculation is the slide you're looking at. It looks so simple, but a lot of work and thinking had to go into this, both with the city and with a consulting engineer. Do I have a,
There is a pointer on there
there's
usually.
a pointer. Oh, yeah.
They
Okay.
can't see.
All right,
I'll try.
oh, you can't see this.
I'll try to follow you
Oh, all right,
without
perfect.
touching it.
So we started this growth calculation by getting some information from Murray Smith, and what they told us was these numbers here: 3.4 million gallons per day in 2015, 3.9 million gallons per day in 2020, and 5.2 million gallons per day in 2040. We took that and we compared it with the number of meter capacity equivalents in your current customer base. But it's 2019 now, it's not 2015 or 2020, so we had to do some interpolation to get the right number of MGD for 2019, and that's 3.8. And in our calculations, all the decimal places are there. We're only just showing you one. So we then have a ratio of meter capacity equivalents to average day demand. And in the absence of any evidence to the contrary, we treat that ratio as constant. So when Murray Smith tells us that we're going to have 5.2 million gallons per day of demand in 2040, that gets equated to 21,320 meter capacity equivalents. The bottom line is, during the planning period, we expect growth of 5,763 meter capacity equivalents, and that is your denominator for the SDC calculation. And that denominator and slow me down if I'm not making sense. So that denominator gets applied to both the reimbursement fee, and the reimbursement fee here is shown graphically as a slice of available assets. It's only the eligible portion. It's only the portion where there is available capacity. And we do have some available capacity. This is based upon your master plan, which is now dated, but we have adjusted the numbers accordingly, so you would have had more available capacity back when the master plan was done. We have adjusted it to bring it up to date. But you have currently more storage than you need, and that plus an appropriate allocation of general plant gives you about $6 million of eligible assets that you can put into the reimbursement fee cost basis. Now, these numbers make your SDC slightly higher than it otherwise would be, but it can be worthwhile because a reimbursement fee can be spent on capital that is not necessarily growth related. So that gives you some flexibility for just straight up replacement projects if you want to use it that way. Likewise, an improvement fee is based upon just a portion of a project that will serve future growth. And we got a lot of help here from your consulting engineer to identify those percentages on a project-by-project basis. So we feel like we have that pretty well dialed in. You do have a total of 92 projects on your project list with a total cost of $83 million. And after we went project by project with Murray Smith to determine eligibility, the overall average eligibility was just under 63%, which means your total eligible cost basis for the improvement fee is just shy of $52 million. So here's how the calculation comes together. You have total unused capacity of $6 million in the reimbursement fee cost basis. We take out an allocation of current fund balance because you've already collected that money. You don't need to collect it again. So you have a reimbursement fee cost basis of just over $5 million. You divide by the growth, and you have a reimbursement fee of $870 per meter of capacity equivalent. Moving to the improvement fee, you have eligible costs. This is not the total cost, the eligible cost, just shy of $52 million. Again, you take out an allocation of the fund balance because you've already collected that, and you're down to $49 million. You divide that by your meter capacity equivalents, and that's $8,505 per MCE. Adding those up, your total SDC per MCE is $9,374, which is significantly more than double your current SDC, which is $4,136. This is what the full fee schedule would look like. It is an increase. That is a normal problem for cities to grapple with. And this is a good point to remind you that you are under no legal obligation to charge the full amount that I'm showing you here. The SDC that we calculate should be thought of as a ceiling, where you are legally, in our opinion, you are legally protected under that, but you have no obligation to go all the way to the top if you don't want to. There are financial consequences, that's for sure. But we just would tell you, don't go over these numbers, because then you're inviting real trouble. Based upon our calculations, if you did choose to implement the full SDC that we're recommending, that would put you near the top on water SDCs, just under West Lynn. West Lynn, which has some of the lowest rates, also has the highest SDC, which is interesting. I don't know the meaning behind that or any of these. It's always risky for us to do these comparisons because we are comparing the rate that we calculate versus what other folks actually implemented, and there's a whole lot of folks in the middle of implementation, 3-4 year phasing schedules, or they just decide not to implement the full SDC. That happens all the time. But let's say that you do want to implement either the full or some SDC other than what you currently have. This is what the process looks like. First, you set a date for the public hearing. It has to be at least 90 days from now because of what comes next. And that is, there is a provision in statute that you have to give 90 days notice of the public hearing. You will have a list of interested parties. It will certainly include your home builders and other folks. And those are the folks that you want to make sure know about the public hearing 90 days in advance. For the last 60 of those 90 days, you're going to have a report that you're going to make available to them. We will give you that report. In fact, I think we already have. And that report has to be available for the last 60 days of the notice period so they can inspect it and come prepared to the public hearing. The city commission is free to discuss the SDC, you're free to have me come do presentations. You can talk about it all you want in public, but you just can't take action until that 90 days has passed and you've reached the public hearing. Rates is a much simpler process. There's no statutory notice period. You just have that charter amendment to deal with, and that will really dictate the process that you need to follow.
Just the charter.
I like the 90 days better than
I was like,
I don't mean to be flippant about it. I know
Two of the
it's,
people who sponsored that charter amendment are sitting here tonight.
yeah.
We're one of, we're one of, there's,
We're not apologizing.
West Lynn has a charter, requirement like that, and Oregon City does. I'm not sure if many others.
I'm not sure. I could not speak to that.
Are you asking if there are other cities that had similar requirements?
I know West Lynn does.
Yeah, there are several.
Yeah.
You've been so patient with me and listened to me ramble on. Are there any questions I can answer?
We need to start growing some money on trees.
Commissioner Lyle Smith?
Yes, Mr. Lewis, this new proposed flat rate of the 5%, I believe, I don't remember what your dad's last name was, Gabbard? Mr. Gabbard?
Thank you.
I believe he said that that would change the timeline of our capital improvement projects, correct? And one thing I didn't understand in the graph, I think, was the one bar for 2020 that shot up really high and then everything went down. So one, can you explain the reason the bar is shooting up really high for 2020? And then can you provide maybe some comfort for us of how you would like to manage or how you will plan to manage those capital improvement projects, that timeline, and is that going to be a problem?
So, we're just working harder in 2020, that's all there is to it. And then we're gonna rest later. No, the 2020 expenditure is really Malala Avenue, Myers Road, and then we're still gonna do our annual water main rehab project. So it's a bump that we had programmed for, aligning with those two major transportation projects, and they're both large diameter water main projects and multiple million of each. So that's where that is. We'd also set aside some capital funding, so it looks a little low in 2019 just because we were pushing those expenses to 2020, saving some of the revenue that we'd acquired. So that's how that is. With regard to the other projects, I think especially when you look at the capital plan, some of those are going to be more difficult to deliver than others. So we are going to have some work to do in terms of how to program that funding. And I suspect, if we had a push like we did with Malala and Myers Road, it would be a challenge for us to kind of keep up with that. But I like the idea of planned capital funding that we can save for 1 year and spend the next, that kind of an assemblage of projects that are aligned with, maybe paving project or another grant award project is kind of been the model that we've been trying to do. So I would not anticipate that we'll program that capital in a nice planned event like that, but the reality of it is from year to year, depending on our ability to maybe get the right of way or get the easements or get the engineering done or do it in maybe we need to put 3 years worth of projects together into 1 year. That is probably going to play out a little differently, but I think it's well within kind of what we do on a regular basis for most of our funding.
Well, the other thing would be if there's an unexpected failure. So if you had a project that you were assuming was going to last, we weren't going to address for 5 years or 7 years, and it happens next year, that's obviously going to shift.
There's an example of that was the leak at South Fork. And so we had a main already programmed into our capital improvement plan, but with the main break, we decided to move forward with that.
So essentially, you're kind of doing the same thing.
It does.
In the non-flat rate idea. I mean, I guess I'm trying to remember back to what you presented to us before, which was the non-flat rate, which maybe it just accelerated. Was it accelerating the capital improvement projects earlier?
My recollection was so when we developed the master plan, we're working with our operations folks. We're in where the pipelines are exposed, let's say a pressure reducing valve or a pump station or something. To be honest with you, when we talk to the operations folks, it's all needing to be done yesterday. We would really like to get this done. It's been something that we've been throwing maintenance dollars at that we shouldn't have to be throwing maintenance dollars. So when you look at that master plan, a lot of that stuff gets front loaded in that, we might have a 3 to 5 year, 5 to 10 year, 10 to 20 year kind of pocket that we put those in, and it seemed like everything was ending up in that 3 to 5 year wish list. The reality of that is if we did all that work in that time frame, we'd have to, staff up much more in a much more robust way. So it was kind of a combination of seeing the results of the financial analysis and acknowledging the fact that, well, if we spread that work and push some of that front-ended work out, that would help both from a funding need and from a ability to deliver the project's need.
Okay.
So none of the scenarios, and you saw a number of scenarios, and we can revisit them if you like, but none of the scenarios that you saw before involved reshaping capital spending. That was only done for the 5% scenario that we looked at tonight. All the scenarios you saw last time were based on everything being built on time, whether by cash or with debt.
With the original master plan idea, right.
I want to say we did a little smoothing even before we started running rate analysis too, because there was some obvious kind of like, how are we really going to do that? But yeah.
So our maintenance expenditures, are they stable or are they escalating from year to year? Because I'm looking back, is there an effective savings by accelerating these capital projects and bringing them forward? Or is the savings so small that the maintenance?
I would advocate for more spending sooner because, well, I mean, let's face it, right now in our summer demand periods, we are struggling to keep up with the needs, right? So in high demand seasons, our system is built such that we got to push a lot of water south, right? From the Division Street pump station, we got to pump it. And to keep up with the demand, we're finding our pumping rates going up and up and up, right? So our operations guys are struggling sometimes to keep those reservoirs at the level that we want them to. So there's some pretty big pipe projects that we need to do sooner, right? And depending on where you are on the development and delivery of development, we're also seeing some challenges with how to serve, let's say, the Beaver Creek concept area. That's kind of a higher, that's higher than anywhere else in the city in terms of elevation. Just out past the high school, it gets kind of at a high point. Right now, we don't have the capital funding we need to build a reservoir, build a pump station to serve that area. So what do? If development happens now, we're going to have to work with our partners in CRW to serve that area. And that is problematic in that, well, the message I've always received is we want to serve our own customers in Oregon City. We want them to utilize South Fork water. And so those are some pretty big capital projects. I think whether all of it is needed to do what we need to do to serve that area, I think the projects out in that area are about $14 million worth of projects, if I remember correctly. It'd be nice to get a big chunk of that work done so that we're self-reliant as opposed to, or we're making that decision that we're partnering with CRW and, rather than just having them serve it and we pay a higher rate over time for that to serve those customers. So there is some value in trying to build some of this, what I would call more trunk line capital early. And we always have, we're seeing, I presented some of this to the CIC last night, and I know we're going long here, so I'm going to try to, but we're seeing 40 and 50-year-old pipelines fail that we've got in McLaughlin neighborhood, we have some 100-year-old pipelines. And yet we're seeing up on the hilltop area where we're pumping it, especially in the summertime, we're pumping at a pretty high rate just to fill those reservoirs, which means those internal pipe pressures get higher. And we're seeing cast iron pipelines that are basically cracking and, bubbling up and creating leaks. And so what we found in those is a lot of those, a current day standard is to put better pipeline, first of all, better pipe material. But we also put it in an envelope of gravel bedding. And what we're finding in a lot of the pipelines that have recently failed is that pipeline was built and set right on the clay soil. rather than having an envelope of gravel. And we think that between the cast iron and the clay pipe, and maybe the fact that maybe seldom dries out, is corroding those old pipelines. So those are, within the last 3 weeks, we've seen 3 of those. And it's an issue.
I mean, that's why I was asking about your comfort level with us smoothing those capital improvement projects. I mean, on one hand, it sounds like there's a need, to be prepared up front or to be able to take care of some of these things versus pushing them out. I mean, it's a little bit of a roll of the dice, right? I mean, so, okay.
Anybody else? Commissioner McGriff?
Is there any conservation model built into this so that if a consumer uses less water, that it helps the system in the long run? I mean, I remember back when we had, watering every other day and people, there was some sort of a system set up so that people got some modest reward for conserving.
Well, our rates are based on consumption, so that helps. We do have the educational program, but most of our system design is based on fire flow, to be quite honest with you. If all we had to do is domestic flow, even though we're struggling to keep up with that in our peak season.
Well, you're talking about high demand, so
The high demand is a problem in summertime. Should we ramp up our conservation message? Probably, just because of, trying to keep reservoirs full. But, so did that answer your question?
Well, I just think that we have to look at sort of all sides of that equation. If we have high demand, how could we help provide some modest, and I mean very modest incentive to say, if you don't use as much, I mean, the PGE's doing this whole thing, let's do your laundry at, off-peak hours, it saves electricity, you get a little bit of a rate savings there. And, for me, I'm doing my laundry late at night anyway, so when there's not a peak demand, because that's when I'm up. But I just think we have to look at a very well-rounded approach, and I was wondering if there's anything built into this that talks about that. And if we don't, then why aren't we talking about it? I think we have to be responsible all the way around to our constituents about what's going on here. And if we're just continuing to use, and we tell people, hey, I see water running down the street, I'm sure you do too, and think, what are they doing?
We could talk to FCS Group about a little more innovative rate structure that does a lot more to honor consumption. There's other agencies that have more complex rate methodology than we do. So that's a good point. We can bring back something in the future on that.
I just think it would show our constituents that we're not only looking at this aspect, but we're looking at everything. And they can help solve some of this problem as well.
So just as a quick clarification, this rate model is based upon the existing rate structure. So X% applied to whatever pricing you have currently. It certainly would send the right incentive signal to put more of your cost to be recovered in the volumetric rate rather than a base rate. But now you're also taking on more risk.
Yeah, I understand.
If you give the incentive to conserve and then they do, that's a financial hit.
Commissioner Lyle.
So do we have to do the water rate and the SDC adjustment at the same time?
No, we.
They're just being presented together.
Right,
Because
so
they were studied together.
I would say the rate has been the one that we've been most on top of. The SDC, I want to say we did an SDC increase in 2012. I may be wrong about that date, but it's been a while since we do the annual 3% rate adjustment for SDCs as well. But we haven't done a detailed study that shows here's really where your SDC should be. And so I would say the SDC's more behind than rates. So.
Okay, any other questions? All right, thank you for your time, sir, appreciate it.
My pleasure, thank you.
Thank you.
What are our next steps, John, or did you need anything?
Well, we plan to take the capital plan to the planning commission, and we want to make sure we're doing our schedule calls us for doing more public outreach. So we're going to deal with that. We're going to probably post that 90-day notice, and we'll be back to the city commission on really kind of the reality of what SDC should be and where you want to go with rates. If we need to, if we're in agreement that something above the 3%, and that's going to require a charter amendment, that right now we're pretty certain, I'm pretty certain we can't hit the May deadline. So we'd probably look at something, what was the next, do you remember the next opportunity, August or?
It can either be September, if you want to pay for it.
Yeah, September or
it would be
November. And we'd probably target that September date.
So you're gonna move forward with the 90-day notice on the SDC piece?
We probably would, yeah.
And the purpose of that is to just gain public input, or you feel like everybody up here is on board with raising the SDC rates? I feel like if you do the 90-day thing notice, then we're marching down that path, and I guess I don't know is everybody up here on board with raising the SDCs, or am I misunderstanding?
No, that's true.
Well, it's a discussion to have inside that 90 days. So
Okay.
in the first 60, we can have a work session discussion or, general discussion at the city commission meeting. We just can't vote on the issue.
Right.
But we could get us to a place that we have an understanding of what the consensus is.
We have to give that 90 days if I'm trying to remember this, but I don't know if there's a certain threshold, but there's to adopt a new capital plan and a new SDC associated with that, we do have to go through that 90-day period of time. So
we're just doing it not knowing exactly what the outcome may be.
we won't know where we're going to land. We're assuming that they're going to go up. If the commission was at a place where they felt like no way, that would be good to hear tonight.
Oh, I don't think we're there, so. Let's move on. The buildable land inventory and preliminary housing needs analysis, Ms. Turway.
Thank you very much. In order to plan for our future, we must understand our future housing needs and the availability of housing, both within our city and within our urban growth boundary. The last time this analysis was done was in 2002 under very different codes, prior to some urban growth boundary expansions. And so we recently worked on a project with Clackamas County and a variety of other cities in the Clackamas County to do a housing needs analysis, or HNA, and a buildable lands inventory, or BLI. And so we're here to present some of those preliminary results. Pete will walk you through with our next steps after this, but this is just an initial presentation of what came out of that work, and there's more. Also, one more thing I want to note is that this project was paid for out of the state's general fund, and it came through the Department of Land Conservation and Development. So we thank them for the work.
Thanks, Laura. Good evening, commissioners. So as Laura mentioned, this is part of a larger regional analysis that Clackamas County is just about to adopt, and we are part of that. The overall geography of this project is you have your unincorporated Clackamas County area within the Metro UGB, and then selected cities, which is where we are. And then the county-wide analysis is a very large document that extends beyond the UGB to the entire county. And this began at the end of last year as Echo Northwest started the study. And the methodology for the study is prescribed under state law. And a lot of the study is based on existing data that Metro had already compiled for the city, but we looked through a lot of that information and made sure that it was current. So the buildable land inventory portion of it, that has to comply with statewide Planning Goal 10 for housing and policies that govern planning for residential uses. And that outcome is that Oregon City has 866 unconstrained buildable acres of residentially zoned land and 73 acres of vacant commercial land. And about 37% of our unconstrained buildable land is residential land is vacant, and 63% are in tax lots that are partially vacant. So we have a significant amount of tax lots in the city that are partially developed and could be redeveloped, and this baseline inventory doesn't really go into a detailed analysis of how that redevelopment could play out in terms of units. But I'll share with you what some of these details. First of all, there's a housing forecast that comes out of this. The 20-year housing forecast through 2039 is that we will grow by approximately 3,000 households, and that's about 150 dwelling units per year over a 20-year period. As far as housing mix goes, we're very similar to the county. We have a majority of single-family detached, about 75%. 6% is single-family attached or townhomes, row houses, and 20% of that is multifamily, which is defined as 3 or more units together in a parcel. In comparison, Portland has slightly less detached and slightly more multifamily. And by Portland region, we're taking in all 3 counties, Multnomah, Clackamas, and Washington. Changes in median sale price for housing is significant. The red arrows just indicate where we're at in comparison. So they've increased about 46% between 2015 and 2019. Median gross rent also during this period has increased about 55%. So there's a cost burden associated with renters, which is significant. We'll get into that. Multifamily gross rent has increased 47% for that same period, from 2010 to 2018. And when we talk about cost burden, that means that you're spending 30% or more of your household income on housing costs, whether you're renting or buying. For Oregon City, our renters are cost burdened, about 50% of them, and about 30% of our homeowners are cost burdened. And they're very similar to those in the Portland region. This is where we fall in relation to other cities in the county. And 1 second, I'll get caught up here. And so overall, we have severe cost burdens for about 25% of our renters. And what does this mean in terms of housing units? There's some trends that it talks about in the document. Oregon City's share of folks that are over 60 years of age is slightly smaller than the county. And so there are desire for housing types for people who are downsizing or may not be able to live in their home anymore. We have a slightly higher proportion of millennials in the county. They have different desires as far as housing too. They may be starting a family. They may be wanting a more urban lifestyle and that sort of thing. So when we analyze housing needs for Oregon City, we need to take that into account. And our Latinx population has also increased significantly. Well, not significantly, but it has. And these trends suggest increases in demand for single-family attached housing and multifamily housing. If you look at housing need by income level, essentially what we're looking at is about 27% of our future households will have incomes that are below half of the Clackamas County median family income. And that median family income for Clackamas County is around $84,000 per household. And about 31% of our future population would have incomes between 50 to 120%. Then that would mean about $40,000 a year to $97,000 a year. And 41% of our households would have incomes that are higher than 120% of the median income. So they're fairly affluent. And what that means is that we have a need for both higher amenity housing types, which can mean the houses themselves have greater amenities, but also what are they close to in terms of location, parks, and services. But we also have a need for affordable housing types like the missing middle housing types that we just adopted code for, as well as government subsidized housing and apartments. And on page 366 of the document, which is the Oregon City excerpt of it, there's a summary of the analysis. Basically, they looked at the buildable lands inventory and the future needs, and they're saying that we do have a surplus of capacity of vacant land for residential use over the next 20 years, except for high-density residential. And there's a need to identify further opportunities to meet that need for multifamily housing, either through how we redevelop in our mixed-use zones, which allow multifamily use, increases in multifamily density in those existing zones, possibly rezoning, and development of more multifamily in our mixed-use commercial areas through a variety of policies and incentive programs, as well as relying on the market, or a combination of all of these approaches. And so building off of this baseline analysis is what we were hoping to incorporate this data into the comprehensive plan update with. And that's going to include outreach to the community, sharing the results of this study, and then through supplemental housing need analysis that we would be seeking grant funding for through the comprehensive plan. We'd further examine the availability and location and need for housing costs by cost and type. And we'd also look at the impact of our recent zoning code amendments. Pardon me.
That was
So I'm done. Let's see if I can scroll back there.
Where do you want to go back to?
Teach John Lewis that, would you?
do that.
And we also need to do this analysis in the context of Clackamas County and what they're doing in Oregon City. We wanted to incorporate a more detailed analysis of redevelopment for our mixed use and commercial zones, because we have a bunch of existing programs that'll address this already, but which we need to look at in more detail, like the vertical housing incentive program and the opportunity zones and that sort of thing. So that's all I have. It's a very qualitative overview, and thank you for your attention on that.
Questions? Commissioner McGriff.
Yes, thank you, Pete and Laura. And as you know, I was one of the people on the Equitable Housing Group that was advocating for this before we even started that project. What I have a question about is whether or not you feel we will have the opportunity to go back and fine-tune what we just adopted based on updated information, because that's probably my biggest concern, is that we took too big of a broad brush on the equitable housing and we didn't hone it down to what I feel should have been identified as Oregon City's very specific needs, and where in our community we should have alternate housing, whereas the approach we took was sort of the big broad brush and it applied to everybody. And I just want to make sure that we as a community are going to come back and make some adjustments that really, I feel, work for what we need in Oregon City and not what works for Portland or Hillsborough or somebody else.
Good question. So as Pete was mentioning, with our comprehensive plan update, as a part of our grant, we included a supplement to this document to look into it further. We have a lot of assumptions built into this document. Some we might want to keep and some we might want to change. It hasn't been through this public vetting process yet. So at the end of that comprehensive plan update, we'll have a list of tasks to do in the future, and one of those tasks may be to change our code. In the comp plan update, we're not changing our code itself. The other thing to be thoughtful of is that House Bill 2001, so there's other regulations coming in place about what types of housing we must adopt locally within a certain time frame. So we want to have a really good, robust community conversation about housing and the types of housing and the regulations that we provide through the comp plan.
Thank you. Steve, one thing I would like to piggyback on, something that Dan talks about a lot, is that, again, we are a home rule city, and I don't really care what the state tells us we have to do. I think we need to do what works for Oregon City with regard to our land use and our housing needs. It's just, I feel very strongly about our home rule ability. And I respect the state, I support planning, as you know I do, but sometimes you kind of just have to say, wait a minute, this is not what works for Oregon City, this is what works for Oregon City, and we get to make our case to them and say, this is what we think works better for us. Not gonna say no totally, but just tell them this is what works better for us.
Anybody else?
I'll just say I agree with Commissioner McGriff. I'm curious, has anybody heard anything about the legal, cities suing the state behind HB 2001?
There were some questions at the league meeting. There was some discussion.
Because I've heard rumors that there would be a lawsuit.
They didn't actually use the word lawsuit, but they said that they are investigating options.
I hope.
Anybody else? All right. Do you have anything under manager's report? Then we're going to adjourn and reconvene in executive session. We do not expect to come back out and make any decisions tonight.